Okay, so hopefully everyone is here. We're going to talk about cloning your ArcGIS using the Python API. I'm Bill Major. I'm actually work for the ArcGIS Enterprise team. I'm based out of the DC office on the East Coast. Okay, and I'm actually going to give Chris Fox a lot of credit here towards the end. He helped develop some of the new cloning methods we have in the API, so that's good as well. All right, so okay. So what are we here to learn about today? So if you looked at the description, I just want to call something out, is that we are constantly expanding the capabilities of being able to clone items across different portals. And when I talk about between portals, that is also to include ArcGIS Online, of course, okay? We're going to learn about techniques to clone information from one WebGIS to another. I don't know how many of you know this, but distributed collaboration does that today. Anyone using collaboration? No one's using collaboration. Okay, interesting. You're interested, okay. Well, we have a whole island place dedicated to that, but distributed collaboration will copy items between portals as well. So if that use case fits you, that's something that to look into as well. But the things we'll talk about today are things that may go above and beyond what the distributed collaboration framework can give you. Okay, what are we not here to learn about? I just threw this out here because probably half of you are here to not learn about this. We've had a lot of questions from customers about, hey, how do I take like a whole huge setup and move it from dev to test to prod, right? Or how do I fully set up this one ArcGIS Enterprise installation on some domain, unplug it, ship it halfway around the world, and plug it into another domain and just have it come up. All right? We understand that these are use cases that you are interested in and need, but we're not going to specifically go over these things today. This is more just related to, the things we're going to learn contribute to this, but we're not covering like a wholesale up and move things today. It's how do you start to take items and users and groups and move them from one portal to another to get them set up. So that's kind of what we're here to learn about today. Is that what everyone else is here to learn about? Maybe. All right. Not a lot of excitement in the back there. Okay, so just a few things. What works well when cloning? Things we're going to talk about today. Well, one of the things that works pretty well is cloning web tier authenticated users. All right, so you may not know this, but how many people have portals set up with IWA or PKI or some type of web tier authentication? Some people. Okay, that's good. So when people come to your portal, it creates a user account, but we actually don't store the password in any aspect of the portal environment. So that makes it very easy to copy a user account from one IWA portal, for example, to another. So if you don't store the password, then when that user comes in, they don't have to like re-authenticate or re-log in with a password. They automatically come into that account. It's very easy to copy groups and sharing. We've got a lot of neat methods for copying hosted feature services now, like all the data out of a hosted feature service, moving it to another one. Really great ways of also copying apps, web app builder apps, web template apps, and many other data types that we'll talk about. And it's important to remember that, I don't know how familiar you are with the REST API of the sharing REST API, but anything that the API lends itself well towards copying, then the API now supports that very well as also. Let me see. What doesn't work too well yet? And I'll just caveat it with yet. Work in progress. Actually moving built-in accounts. Now, why is that problematic? You can do it, but since we don't, nothing has access to the user's original password, when you move that user account over, you have to give it like a new temporary password. So a user, if they come in and want to log into their account, they're going to need to have like some type of temporary password that they log in with initially, and then reset it. So that's what I mean by not cloning well. We just, you don't have access to the password. We don't copy hosted tile services, map services, or image services with all the data over today, okay? Now, you may say, well, why not? Why can't you just do that? Well, if you know anything about a map service, let's take for example, there's a lot of things going on with the map service. There's an MXD that's backing it. You could have data and databases. There's a lot of things that the API doesn't have access to in order to accumulate that up and move it over to another ArcGIS enterprise to be able to publish it the same way. So you can copy those references today, but the URL is going to point back to the original location. Okay, so that's how we support those services today. And then complicated story maps. So I threw this up here because we do support copy in many of the web apps now within Portal, but I think there's still some issues. Story maps can get pretty complicated. You can have story maps inside of a story map. They can have embedded videos and all kinds of stuff. And let me see, I guess I should have put this in full screen. Anyway, and I'm just going to click on this thing here. Here's the XML or the JSON for a story map, and that is a public item on ArcGIS Online. And it's a pretty big JSON structure with a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of URLs. And just to pick this up and move it over, this is still a work in progress for some of the more sophisticated story maps that people can create. How am I doing on time? 7 after. I think we're doing pretty well. Okay, so how do we get started? You're here to learn about cloning, so if you were to approach a process like this, then what are the steps? Well, the first thing you got to do is, today, what we support out of the box is you need to have an active GIS connection. That is, when I say GIS connection, an ArcGIS Python API connection to a source portal and another connection to a target portal. Okay, so you have two active connections that now you're going to use to pass content between. The first step is then go through and create users that you want to set up. Okay, so you're going to take all the users you want to move over, get information about those user accounts, and then create new user accounts in your target portal and move over the same properties and things like that. The second thing you want to do after copying users is you copy your groups over, right? So you got to have users in place first before you have groups in place, because groups have to be owned by a user. So you get your users in place, then you copy your groups over, then you can reassign those groups to different users if that's your workflow as you see fit. And then the final step is, once you have those in place, then you clone your items, right? So you start taking your items over, you move them over, you assign them to different users, you share them a specific way, and then boom, you've cloned your portal, right? It's that easy right there. Just remember that slide. That's all you got to know. Come on. It's Wednesday, right? Yeah, it's Wednesday. All right, so step one, I said you got to have two active connections, right? So what are we going to do? So I'm going to get out of presentation mode, because I told y'all we're going to see some live demos. You want to see this stuff run legit. I don't want you to think I'm a whole lot of smoke and mirrors here. I'm only about 80% smoke and mirrors. Okay. Everyone see okay in the back? All right, so let's quickly look at two portals I have. I have a source portal. I'm going to log in here. These absolutely are federated, right? Everything should be federated. Yes, we're focused on ArcGIS Enterprise, which means federated servers and things like that. All right, so I'm logged into what is my source portal here, okay? This source portal, come on, internet. I decided to not only give live demos, but go wireless, so it's very courageous here. So this portal doesn't have a lot going on in here, just 4 users, and we're going to focus on these users. There's some a couple groups out here we're going to focus on, right? Everything good. And then we're going to focus on this one crazy user called Bill Major. He's got a lot of stuff going on, and that's going to be sort of our use case. Let's pretend that maybe this is an account in dev, a user that you set everything up, and perhaps everything is owned by this user. Now you want to kind of move it over and get it set up on a different portal. So this user, I am Bill Major, by the way, has some items, has some folders, owns a couple groups and things like that. Now I have this second portal, which is we're calling my target portal. It just have a couple users in here. It happens to also have a user called Bill Major, or B Major, that counts empty right now. but there's really no groups in here. I'm checking this to make sure I've cleaned up more than anything. And if we go look at the items owned by this guy named Bill Major, there's basically nothing there, right? So kind of a shell of a ArcGIS enterprise at this point. Nope. Yep. All right. So I'm going to start running some things here. Everyone familiar with Jupyter Notebooks at this point? It is not a requirement to run a Jupyter Notebook to access the ArcGIS API for Python. It's just an easy visualization for some workflows. So that's why we kind of tend to use it a lot here. You can run individual blocks of code and get some visual output and things like that. All right, so here we go. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the Python API. Check. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create two connections, one to the source and one to the target. Now, who has seen this profile parameter before? Anybody seen that yet? So you now in ArcGIS API for Python, I should just say the Python API, you can initially create a connection with the URL, a username, and password, and there's a new parameter called profile. So that when you log in one time using all the parameters, it will save a profile, okay? Then at any time in the future, you can access that profile just by saying that. You don't have to retype in the URL, the username, and password. So I'm accessing two profiles that I've previously created and stored just for simplicity purposes here. So if you haven't seen that, when you go to the API reference for the Python API, check out the profile parameter on the GIS object to look at that a little bit. All right, so I'm going to run that. It takes a few seconds here to establish a connection, make sure everything is good. And I also have a target admin username there. Just ignore that. Let's just ignore that, okay? All right, so then I'm just simply going to display out the source to make sure I'm connected. It's basically saying, hey, yeah, this is a GIS object connection, and that's what I'm connected to. It's just simple print statements. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is going to copy some users, right? So like I said, we're copying from the source portal, these users here, to a target portal. All right. Now we've had some samples around for copying users and things like this for quite a while. So if you've tried to do this before, there's nothing new here necessarily. So let's make sure I can get a list of users from my source portal. Basically, I'm saying, hey, give me all the users, but ignore Esri underscore anything, and also ignore anything admin, okay? So, that's just a little search. All right, so it said it found 3 users. They just happen to all be admins in my portal. And I'm also throwing the provider out there. The provider can either be ArcGIS, meaning it's a built-in account, or if you're using web tier authentication, it will actually say enterprise. All right, so I just put that there just so you understand that there's a difference between built-in user accounts and web tier authenticated accounts. All right, so I'm going to run the same snippet on the target portal and make sure, yep, okay, there's two users there, the administrator and this guy named B Major. All right, so step 1, I guess I could put this in full screen, right? Give me a little bit more real estate. So here's a simple function that we'll run here in a second. And this is actually going to copy users for us. So when we talk about copy users, basically what it's doing is for each user that we iterate over from the source, it's just going to get a bunch of information about the user, their username, their description, their full name, first name, thumbnail, email, and a bunch of information. And then in the target portal, I'm basically going to say, go create a new user and use all these parameters. So that's basically the concept of copying users. You're basically adding new users, but you already have all the information based on a user in another portal. So that's basically all this function is really focused on, is creating users that way. All right. I'm just going to run this little function to create a simple list to make sure I don't try to re-add a user if the username already exists in the target portal, which B Major will. So this is just a little hack here I did. All right, so now we're going to run this thing. And you can see some output there from before. This is where I've run this before practicing. But each time you run a cell, it's actually going to redo that. All right, copy user is not defined. That's because I didn't run this cell to define that function is available. My mistake. You can practice all you want. You always forget something. All right, so you see the little star there when you're running something and it converts to a number. When it converts to a number, it means it's done. Sure enough, it said it added 2 users. And you know what? If I come over here to my target portal and just do a quick little refresh, I have 2 new users, right? Everyone believe in me so far? Feeling good? I know you are. All right, so we got some users created. Now we need to create some groups, right? All right, so let's see what groups are available in the source portal. So, I'm just very focused on 2 groups here owned by this guy, B Major, and the source. So I'm a query, it's like, oh yeah, I found these 2 groups. One is called TVA projects. I used to work for the Tennessee Valley Authority many years ago, so I kind of use that as just a default go-to, and also happen to have some old leftover little bit of data for the country of Mali that I use in demonstration purposes like this as well. So I got 2 groups that I would like to move over to my portal as well. So in this particular case, I have a function called copy group. And again, it's doing something very similar like it did to copy users. It's getting a whole bunch of information about the group, its description, how it's shared, tags, et cetera, and then basically going and creating a new group in your target portal with all those same parameters. Okay? So let me run this cell so that my function copy group becomes declared. This was something I was doing earlier. You can just ignore that. And now what I'm going to do is actually go through and do the copy of calling the copy group command right here. So basically say, hey, here's my target portal, here's my source portal, here's the group item I want to copy because I'm iterating through each of the groups from the source, and there's 2. And if all goes well, life is good. So I'm running this thing now. Ignore the warning I'm getting with the little pink thing. There are a few issues that I've discovered in the Python API. We'll make sure we try to get these fixed as soon as we can. But things are working normally. As I iterate through each group, I'm actually then displaying that the group was created. So I now have 2 new groups. All right, again, not to make sure there's no smoke and mirrors here. If I go to groups, sure enough, there's 2 new groups here, Mali Data and TVA projects. They're owned by B Major, so I created the groups and they reassigned them to the user that owns them over in the source portal as well. All right, I'm feeling good. Created a lot of users, a lot of groups now. Now we're getting to the really good stuff. All right. So we're going to ignore the group mapping right now. I thought this originally was doing one thing and it doesn't quite do what I was expecting, so we're just going to skip over that. All right, so now that I have some users and groups, I'm ready to copy content, or let's say clone content. All right, for the rest of the demo here today, I'm actually going to focus purely on this guy named B Major and content he owns. You could iterate through all the content in the portal if you wanted to, but I'm just, for demo purposes, going to focus on what this user owns. All right, so he has, let's just kind of look at what's here in the source. He has some image services registered. He has some published hosted feature services, one from a shapefile, one from a file geodatabase, a web map, a web app. He's got a couple folders here. He's got some things in a DC folder, some DC like shopping mall and embassies. Do malls and embassies really go together? No, but when you pull demos together, and whatever data you can find for demo is kind of what you roll with a little bit. And then I have this Mali folder that's got just a little bit of data too, but this actually has some map services registered, not feature services, okay? All right, so that's kind of what we're working with this user. So now I'm just gonna run this. This basically iterates through B Major and just spits out everything that this guy owns, right? This is just something I did for my own purposes, but it goes to show you that, hey, I know how to iterate over items and start to get handles to individual items so that I can now do something with them. All right, so the first thing we're going to focus on is, hey, I want to move an image service from the source portal to the target. So everyone knows what an image service is, right? It's an image service that's probably got a whole lot of imagery behind it. It may have raster functions and cache associated with it and things like that. So I'm just going to quickly get a handle to that item in the source And I just quickly came up here and grabbed the item ID, okay? So just a little bit of a shortcut. And I say, hey, in the source, go get this item ID. And sure enough, it's able to search and find that item ID. All right? Now, we're going to use a new method that was released in version 1.4 of the Python API off of the GIS Content Manager object called clone items. So this is new. This has not been there before. And there's a whole lot of good stuff that's behind this method that we've encapsulated so that you don't have to worry about some of this stuff anymore. You basically call this method, pass it an item or a list of items, and it goes and does everything for you behind the scenes. And some really cool stuff in here. All right, so let's make a note of a few things that this thing can do. It can clone simple data items such as files, such as a PDF, map package, a file geodatabase, a zip shape file, some things like that. It can also copy things like web applications, web app builder, template applications, operations views, hosted feature services, hosted feature layer views that have been created from maybe your hosted feature service, feature collections. So it does a lot of great stuff now, being able to move items between portals. And we're going to see some of this in action. All right. Some of the things it does not do a deep copy on, like I talked about earlier, is map services, tile layers, image services. It just doesn't have the knowledge or the API to be able to access to be able to move those things over today. All right. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is move this image service over. All right. Oh, one other thing is anytime you want to get help about the clone items method, you can go online, of course, look at the API. You can also run this nice little thing here with the question mark, and it pops up just a little window that gives you information about the parameters and what each one is expecting. So you decide how you want to get to the help on this item. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say target, clone, and I'm going to say clone items. And I'm going to pass it a handle to the item, image service. So I physically got an item object from the source portal, and I pass it saying, here's the item object I want to copy over. And there's a parameter called copy data true. This is actually true by default. I just threw it here so we could talk about it. And in instances where it can physically take all of the data and move it over, it will. So I'm going to leave it true for now just so y'all can see something here. All right, so I'm now going to actually try to go run this thing. All right, so there's a couple cells we're going to run, have a little bit of dead time. This won't take too much time. So now this has cloned the item. It displayed it here for me. And sure enough, if I go over here to nope, wrong click, this target portal, I have a new feature, a new image service item registered here. Now, did it really copy all the imagery and everything over? So if I scroll down here and look at the URL, no. It's a URL by reference. So it's still pointing to the source. Okay, so this particular clone method is smart enough to know, hey, I can't copy that data because it's an image service. I'm just going to go ahead and create the new item by reference anyway. Okay, so just this is how image services and map services work. It's a copy by reference. Are we good? That was a little scary. Okay, let's move on to something else. How about a hosted feature service, right? A lot of you have asked, hey, I got all this hosted feature service. How can I quickly move that stuff over? All right, so there's a feature service up here. I grabbed the URL for rivers of the United States, okay? Very coarse rivers. All right, so I'm going to get a handle to that guy. Oops. Yep, I got a handle to it, and now I'm going to clone that hosted feature service. All right, so let's run this thing. So remember that copy underscore data parameter, if you don't specify it, is true by default. So this clone method says, oh, that's a hosted feature service. I know that I can actually extract all that data and then move it over and publish it as a new hosted feature service on my target. So that's what it's doing right now. Wait for it. So it's basically bundling that up, moving it over, and when I finish here in just a second, I'm going to have a new hosted feature service. Let's go to my content. It's probably should be showing up by now. It's not quite done yet, but the registration is already there. We'll take a look at it. So now I have this rivers here. So if I click on this guy and go look at it, just the item details, you can see that the URL is not the old idt.esri. This is the hosting ArcGIS server here for this portal. Okay, so this is now finished, and I have a handle to it. So it has now fully taken all of that data and moved it over to my new ArcGIS Enterprise, and that data now lives purely over there. It's got a new item ID because it was like just adding a new item, but I've moved that feature service over. So that's really cool, right? All right, now here's probably one of the more exciting things in the clone methods. I know we're almost out of time, but bear with me. I have a web app template, a web app built off of the basic viewer applet. So we scroll back up here and look for a moment. I had a web app template that points to a web map, and that web map had loaded into it 2 hosted feature services on the source portal. All right. So this is where a lot of really great things can happen. So I'm actually just going to say, you know what? I want to move this web map application, just that item ID. All right, so let's scroll back down. So when you do this, so I'm going to get a handle to that first, and then I'm going to say clone it. Here's another parameter for clone is if you want to load it into my content, but also move it into a folder, I'm saying go ahead and move it into the DC folder as well. So what's happening here is pretty exciting. What this does is it actually will take the web app, it will also clone the web map, and it will also clone all of the services that are in that web map. So it sort of does it all at once for you. You don't have to go through and move this feature service, then move this one, then move this web map, and then create the web app. If you point at something like a web app, it actually interrogates sort of the dependencies, everything that's involved in that, and then moves it over all at once. So that's pretty cool, right? Is that cool? You got a question? That's a great question. And I'm going to go based on my knowledge, not actually trying it. There's also a parameter, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, on the clone methods that you can set that will say, hey, when you move this over the target portal, search for it first to make sure it doesn't already exist in that portal. So is that right? Is that what it does? So there is a parameter that you can flip on to do those checks. Did you stage that question for me? Because that was a great question. All right, so look, something happened over here. So let's go back to my source portal, or my target portal. And now it's like, oh, where's it at? Well, remember, I told it to move it into the DC folder. And sure enough, look what I got. I have a web app, I have a web map, and I have the 2 hosted feature services. So it's basically created a web map, gotten that ID, associated that ID with the web app, because that's what a web app looks for, web map IDs to display. And then it also moved over the hosted feature services. You may be saying, that ain't really true, Bill. You need to give me some proof on that, all right? So if we go down and look at the hosted feature service, sure enough, that is published over on my new hosting server. It's not pointing to the old one. And if I go back and open up the web map, just to prove things came over okay, then, yep. I know we're out of time, but give me 3 more minutes. So this opens up. There's my 2 hosted feature services. This particular app template, I had like 3 widgets on it, so it made sure it brought over the full configuration. All right, so this is really cool. If you really want to get into trying to figure out how to start cloning things between portals, this is a great thing to start to look at. All right, a couple more things here. We're almost down at the bottom here. Maybe I'll skip this one, but no, I'm going to do this. So I also have a web app, if we go back up here, in my source of Mali data, and it actually has 2 map services in that web map. Remember the Mali data, I had 3 map services. They weren't hosted feature services, but they were just map services registered that just happened to be in that web map, which was then in the web app builder app. All right, so I'm going to run this guy because the result is a little bit different. All right, so I'm gonna get a handle to the web app builder app, and then I'm going to clone that guy. So give it a minute. So if I come over here, here is sort of everything in the source, the app, the web map, and 3 registered services, okay? Now this guy, it's actually done. That's cool. Am I in my source? So if we go back to organization and go to this guy named Bill Major, which I think I was already at, my mistake, go to Mali. You'll notice it had only brought over the web app and the web map. Now, Chris, I wanted to ask you this and I forgot. I assume this is the desired effect. Although the web map in the source had map services in it, in this case of copying an app in the web map, since you can't copy a map service, then it just copies the web map over with the reference URLs remain in place. It doesn't re-register those map service items here in the target portal. Is that okay? That's by design right now. But anyway, the good thing is that I can launch this guy. It's still pointing to map services over in my old portal by reference, right? And sure enough, if I open this, the web app is existing in my target portal. It's thinking about it, it's thinking about it, it's thinking about it. So here we go. Now, this is interesting. It's like, what's going on here? Well, depending on your scenario, since it's referenced, since it's trying to reach back to the source portal, I might not have had things shared publicly or something over there. So anytime you're reaching back to another enterprise installation, you need to provide an identity to access that data. So this may be a side effect of setting something up in this case. So anyway, I'm not going to go through loading that up, but all right. And a gentleman came by yesterday and asked me, is he here about copying secured services? There you are. Were you okay? So everyone knows what a secured service is. Like if you have a registered service from an unfederated ArcGIS server that's got like a username and password or something. Or maybe it's an ArcGIS online service, okay? When you register one of those types of items in a portal, it creates what we call a proxy item, proxy URL item, because the credentials that you have to input for that then get stored encrypted as part of that item. The question was, hey, if I copy a secured service from one portal to another, does it move over those credentials so it can just automatically use it? And the answer is no, it does not. It will move the item over, but the credentials aren't there. That's something that we'll look into as part of improving upon about, I'm not even sure that you have access to the credentials through the REST API to be able to move that information over. So I did look into that, and it copies the item, but it actually doesn't, the credentials aren't there to support it. All right, just final slide here. Thank you all for hanging in there, and this is real big. Future improvements, things that I think we're going to keep looking at. Continue improving the clone items method. A lot of effort went into this. We'll keep expanding upon it, maybe support additional item types. A lot of people have asked, hey, I'm federal government. I want to move things between networks that are disconnected. If I can't have 2 active portal connections at once, we'll look at, well, maybe how do you do the same type of thing, but save it all to some kind of file package and then upload it into a portal in a disconnected or a non-network or something like that. I think that's very important. Handle service, secure service proxy items. And also, anytime you're working with the Python API, we have a samples website. A lot of the samples that you may have seen, public on GitHub, log issues out there. If they don't necessarily relate to the samples, we monitor that. If you got suggestions or improvements, please throw issues out there of ways that you may want to see this improve. So that's it. Thank you. We have no one waiting to get in here, I don't think. So I can hang around and answer questions as long as you want me to. Yes, ma'am. It's default to true, copy data.
So what if it's false?
If it's false, then it will copy an item by reference, like a map service. So if you like try to copy a hosted feature service and you say copy data false, it will treat it just like a map service at that point. It will create the new item, but the URL will be porting back to the old portal. Yep.
So we have the older Arc server account that's not federated.
An old ArcGIS server, unfederated.
And we are trying to transfer all of this stuff that we have here to our new federated server.
Oh.
Can it go from standalone to federated, or is there something else I have to do?
So the question is, if I just have an unfederated server, can I use this to move it to a new federated server environment? So remember, map services, there are ways to accomplish that. Clone items is not going to do it for you. Okay, there are other Python API ways to get at some of that stuff and move it over. Maybe a combination of ArcPy and the Python API to make that happen. But clone items is not sort of designed for that use case. That was loud. The question was, is there any support for cloning geoprocessing services? It's sort of like an image service, like what's behind a geoprocessing service, or there's a Python script or a model builder or something that you don't have access to through a REST service to be able to gather that information up. Supporting more service types is something we're looking at, and if we can, we will. I guess it's a little bit of an unknown right now. Yes, ma'am. No, this works for ArcGIS Online or Portal. I was a portal to portal scenario today, but you can do ArcGIS Online to Portal or vice versa as well. When I say Portal, it's sort of like Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. I'm sorry, the IDs here do not remain the same. I don't know if did I make the point earlier about distributed collaboration, keeping the same IDs? Did I say that? I did or did not? Some people say, okay, I did. In this case, no, you're creating new items, so they're getting new item IDs. Yep. I forget the name of that parameter to look. If you go to what's that? Search existing items, yeah. If you go to the help for the Python API, go find the clone items. It's explained in there very well what the parameter is and how to use that.
Does cloning a web map, not an app, just a web map, will that do the services along with it?
Yep. Should.
This is for enterprise to enterprise or HTML to enterprise, so that means it's only valid for 10.5 and 10.6, not 10.4?
How far back? The question is, hey, this is like, ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Online, 10.6, 10.5 to online and back and forth. Can you use a 10.4 to online? I think you probably can. Yeah, be aware that if you try to go from like a 10.5 portal that may have some new capabilities or new type of feature service collection, for some reason you're trying to copy it to an older one, then that old portal may not know what that item type is or something. You may run into issues like that. Going up in version should work fairly well. Yeah.
If you show a web map that points to a map service,
Mm-hmm.
is it just to republish that service to the new server and then change the URL in the web map?
Yeah, so if I have a web map and a map service on my source portal, and I take that map service and go ahead and publish it over here, and then I clone the web map over. So yes, in that case, there's another parameter in the clone items method that does like an existing item check. So you can basically say, hey, when you clone this, there's another parameter that says, hey, there's a map service with this ID, but over here, the map service actually is this ID now. Do that swap when it copies the web map over. Yeah, so there's a way to do that. Yep. You can always update the URL of an item. Yeah. So what's that?
That would happen as part of that item map.
Yeah.
You specify, this is my map service, I find myself. This is my map service, I find my target. And you swap the URLs in the web map.
It would like do that, go look up this item, get information about it, and jam in the new URL. Anything else? All right. Thank you all very much. Have a great conference, great day, etc.